I'm going to take that topic and kind of combine it with the one that we just talked about as far as big cities and small towns. Do you think here in America we're not set up to fail in generosity, but we have a built-in system? Like if you travel Europe, if you haven't traveled Europe before, or if somebody's listening hasn't traveled for Europe before, but there's a noticeable difference as you go into a restaurant. The price is the price, and there's no tip required. But in America, everybody that comes over here feels forced into giving a tip of some sort. And I don't know how you feel about that, but when I sit at a restaurant, I like to determine based off of my service, how much should this person, how generous am I feeling based off of what they did as far as service goes. I don't want to be guilted into a 10% or 15% gratuity because that's a social norm. And I don't know how you think that this fits into generosity, but to me, there's some underlying methodology there to I much rather tip someone in Europe that say that there's not expecting a tip because they went above and beyond and did something, and I would like to be generous, rather than being set up in a situation where I feel forced to give a certain amount of money, irregardless of perhaps how generous I'm feeling, or perhaps how good of a job they did.
Well, TIPS is an acronym to ensure prompt service. And that's what originally it meant. So you'd put the money down in the box to guarantee that you'd get served before other people. I really love that concept. And I think that's, its origins has a really fundamental, incentivization for people to provide good service or to be more generous. I think to wait till after the meal, or even in massage, I get tipped, So I can't really crap on tips all too much because I think that when, in my industry, when you do go above and beyond, especially in the spa world, for example, you go a bit longer, you really, give all the love, all the healing energy you got. I think that it is a motivator to do your best work, and I think it does incentivize people. And then you place expectations on people to continue to tip you as much. So it's a pretty complex notion. The price is the price, but when people go above and beyond, it speaks to what they receive as well. So I don't know. I'm definitely a believer in incentivizing people to do better work, but maybe the tip in the beginning would, going back to its roots, at least if you knew what you were going to get tipped, then you could mitigate how much energy you're willing to put out if you want to look at money as potential energy. So I guess I have both schools of thought on the subject, but I guess you're just better off, charging more and not asking for a tip if that's really what you feel you deserve, and then just work your hardest. I mean, that's a mantra of greatness as far as I'm concerned. You demand you should give your greatness regardless of what you think you're going to receive anyway. And money to me is an applause at the end of the day more than anything for a job well done. If you're going to contextualize it in tips, but listen, you're getting paid to do a job as well, so you should give your all anyway. So, but I think the original concept of putting, some money in a box to have the waitress come over to you more often, maybe that should be brought back. I don't know.
If we talk about the concept of paying it forward, I don't know if you've heard of these. Starbucks does them a lot. People get into this methodology where they pay for the next coffee of somebody that comes up, and this kind of just repeats over time. And I read this article I'll share with you and want to get your thoughts on it. It's quick, and it was probably a while ago, but the concept still is the same whether it happens today or a year ago. A Florida man put an end to another pay-it-forward streak at a local Starbucks because he said he thinks people were participating out of guilt, not generosity. Peter Schrosch, a blogger, drove to Starbucks drive-thru in St. Petersburg, Florida on Thursday afternoon after hearing about the pay-it-forward phenomena. There ended with customer number 458. A woman the day before. He ordered 2 venti mocha frappuccinos. The barista told him his first drink had been paid for by the previous customer and asked if he would like to pay for the next customer. I told him no, Schroes of St. Petersburg told ABC News. When the barista asks you to pay it forward, it's no longer spontaneous. Though Schwartz didn't pay for the next customer at the drive-thru, he said he did tip the barista $100. So, so I mean, this particular example, it seems like the guy is making a point to say that I'm not going to be guilted into it and wants to just be generous over the top. Whether that generous over the top was, again, seems like a guilt thing in my mind to kind of prove a point. But the whole pay it forward concept, you buying into it as generosity, or is it a guilt-ridden type of concept?
Listen, if Starbucks barista is asking me to contribute to somebody else's welfare that I don't know, it's not too dissimilar than going to the supermarket and being asked, would you like to donate $1 to, the World Wildlife Federation or some local charity. I mean, it's not really your place. You're a clerk. You're selling a product. Stay within your lines, bud. Because, quite honestly, charity, to me, is an act of service. I much prefer to give my time, as I did in Guatemala, to heal a bunch of people, or go out of my way to work in a soup kitchen, which I did a long time ago, quite often. And acts of service that really speak to something deeply within my soul and gives me a sense of self. Maybe not. I don't think it's pure selflessness. I think charity and generosity is a selfish act because it makes you feel good. And even though and that is what often drives people to go farther and farther, kind of within the NGO world and things like that. But stay within your lines, buddy. I mean, I'm here to get my caffeine fix, and if I want to make someone else's day, I'll buy them a sandwich. Let me decide exactly the context. I don't think prompting it with that sort of question and then asking the next person to buy it forward and so on and so forth. It seems more of like a marketing stunt than something that's like authentic generosity. You see a guy on the street who's cold and you buy him a coffee to keep his hands warm, whether he drinks coffee or not. That's something within you. But I think when you're prompted to do it, or maybe even felt bad for not doing it, when you're when the person at the supermarket's like, hey, would you like to donate $3 to a local women's charity? I mean, I'd rather give him a hug than necessarily blindly give $3 that you don't know. With a lot of these charities, I mean, it was said of the American Heart Association that 1/3 of the money goes to paying the administration staff. So, for the 33 cents of every $1, I mean, you're paying some executive to make 6 figures a year. So, I'm a bit dubious of just kind of randomly throwing money in that way. I feel like, as strong as a boycott can be, I think utilizing your generosity and your abundance to make yourself feel good and to make someone stay better, they both have power, but being prompted from someone who's just supposed to take your order, it's like, all right, bud, it's not your job.
So if we've kind of realized that generosity begets generosity, meaning if we do something and we feel good about it ourselves, potentially the person that we inflicted that upon feels good about themselves because they either received the compliment or they received something from you. They're more likely to potentially be generous themselves. I'm wondering why the people that I've kind of run into, why that isn't always the case. Why doesn't it trickle downhill? What keeps people from being generous, even if it's just the compliment situation that you kind of discussed and engaging someone in their day? Is generosity a form of, at its heart, being vulnerable? Do we become vulnerable to the person we're interacting with, even if it's asking them about their day? Are we letting down our guard now that to invite them kind of into our lives, and we don't really want to do that, so we don't see as much of something like that? Is there a fear there that's involved in your mind that is preventing people from possibly becoming more generous, whether it is financially or monetarily, or with their time or their compliments?
Oh, mate. I was even like dubious as you were saying it. I mean, a lot of that stuff, man. I think people are walled off in their own worlds a lot of the time, both for their own safety, maybe out of narcissism, maybe out of, and protection, fear, what have you. And listen, I think that chain stops when someone's just a taker, man. I mean, some people just they give too much, and then some people just aren't. I mean, maybe it takes practice, but consideration is not, in everyone's DNA in a lot of ways. I mean, there's just people that they have, I've often heard that the difference between an optimist and taking it back to the coffee thing, the difference between an optimist and a pessimist is if you buy an optimist a coffee, you just made their day. That was the spark that changed the difference between them having a bad day and a good day. And a pessimist will, if you buy them a coffee, they'll look at it as an opportunity to talk about their problems all day. So I think some people are just black holes, bro. They just, they don't get out of their own way in terms of that, the notion of making other people feel good or having consideration. It's a problem in relationships. I've heard it from a lot of people that they'll, go into a store and see something that they think their lover would just love, and they bring it home. And there's no gratefulness, and that exchange is not reciprocated. And then, it starts to kind of eat away at them, or they stop doing it and they miss doing it, and maybe we'll do it for other people too. So, I mean, I don't even think it's necessarily, man on the street paying it forward. I think there's like some deep, in families. I think there's takers that are parents, there's takers that are children, there's takers that are lovers. And when they do give, then they really, demand a huge applause for it as well. I'm of the mind to think that the world would be a very different place if generosity was rewarded in other ways. And I don't mean just a tax break, but that, not necessarily, you go to the, what is it called? The Peace Corps, like 2 years after college and get paid $1,000 a year and, go to Africa and teach farmers how to farm, as opposed to just giving them the money and letting them farm for themselves. But I think that the notion of doing good stuff for other people isn't celebrated in capitalism generally. I think it's, you share with, your network. And I think nepotism is, and I think often nepotism is the motivation for generosity. People love to throw huge parties and spend tons of money, and they invite, a handful of friends, or, invite your friends, and so on and so forth. But, those same people aren't necessarily going to Africa and, feeding refugees and things of that nature. And yet, because they're generous to their friends and they keep true, to this one party a year or whatever that they may do, they do consider themselves truly generous people because of how much they shuck out. So, and I'm not inclined to say that they're not generous people, but I think that there's real caps, human caps to the nature and the parameters of our generosity.
I'd like to revisit the topic that you were talking about the individuals that you consider takers, whether it be in a family member or be just somebody you meet. I'm thinking about the takers that I've met in my life, and I can't help but think if there's something primal involved in that, there's something inherent in our DNA being animalistic that we need to first survive for ourselves. If we make a kill, it's our meat to eat because we need to survive for number one. Then it's shelling out to the family beyond that. And then potentially if we're involved in a tribe, maybe it trickles down to some of the tribe as well. Now, if the tribe helps make the kill, then it would make sense that the meat gets shared potentially, unless there's an alpha situation and some patriarchal situation going on where the king eats first. But I'm wondering in the taker situation if there is if there's something there that is in our DNA that's hardwired and it's not a soft wired thing, and these takers maybe just haven't gotten beyond that.
I think what we're looking at here is one of the most challenging dichotomies in the world. It's self-preservation versus altruism. And I think, I don't know many altruistic 19-year-olds. I don't know if I would say that I was an altruistic 19-year-old. I think, there's a time period of self-centeredness and I would say that in the more American or the more Western context, that I think 19-year-olds are super self-absorbed and they're on fire, and perhaps all over the world too.